And we're going to jump back to the Easter message because, well, I'll explain because why in a minute. We're going to read from the end of the Gospel of Mark. Mark 16, 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, where you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Thus ends the reading, and thus ends the Gospel of Mark. So they went out of the tomb and fled, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Huh? That's kind of an abrupt way to end a story. Scholars say that Mark is the earliest gospel written. And the oldest Greek manuscripts of that gospel stop right there. You may see some printed versions that we have now that have added verses and things, but these are taken from what scholars believe are kind of epilogues and notes trying to explain why it ended so abruptly. Mark's story about Jesus builds to that crescendo, and then click, the lights come on, the movie's over. But it just hangs there. The scribes who made the copies, they may have felt like, that just doesn't seem right. We know more about what happened. But that's where it ends. Mark just stops. They fled and said nothing to anyone. It's quite possible that Mark intentionally left it for people to finish it by living it. I've been wondering about that. The frustrating, hanging ending there does have a clue in it, though. The young man dressed in white, and we sort of flash to angel or messenger, told them a hopeful thing to these three women disciples that were there, and said, "Pass this along to the rest of the disciples. He has gone before you into Galilee." Well, Galilee, that's where his first followers originally came from. That's where Jesus came from. They all grew up there. They worked there. They met each other there. And the angel's clue? Get to work and live what he taught in the real world, where you all came from, in Galilee. Maybe this can be seen as an invitation to each one of us to live our own ending to the gospel, to make that real, choosing to follow him wherever we are in the thick of life, and see what opportunities there are to live compassionately, as Huck said, to be caring, to persevere in faith when everything seems so bleak. He has gone before you into Fairport, Pittsford, Rochester. Even though the ending seems abrupt, sometimes the prospects seem bleak. We may be surprised by the resurrecting power of pure love made human that meets us right where we live, right where we strive to make real the things that Jesus taught and the hope that he shared. We might be surprised when each one of us chooses to be kind instead of angry, chooses to show compassion. And we find that love divine joins us right there and gives us the strength to love more. It helps us to see that through us, that work that Jesus taught, that he lived, works on through us. There's so much left for us to do in Galilee, in the real world. Today is Juneteenth, the 19th of June. Juneteenth is not something that most of us are that familiar with. We've heard a little bit more about it lately, but Juneteenth marks the anniversary of the broad announcement by Union Army General Gordon Granger on June 19th, 1865, of Order Number 3, proclaiming freedom for all enslaved people in the United States, and especially where he was, in Texas. Both the Emancipation Proclamation of 2 years earlier and the end of the Civil War with the Union victory had been kept secret from all the enslaved African people there in Texas. And the general came on June 19th and said, "You are free." Ever since, June 19th has been celebrated in black churches and black communities as a turning point, a sign of hope. And yet, here we are in 2022, still needing to do so much more for racial justice. That's something all of us can participate in. We have to be people that are going into Galilee or into Texas or into downtown Rochester, into Fairport, and living the equality and the justice that we know in our hearts is true and right. And we know, as Hux reminded us, that Jesus treated everybody the same, no matter who they were, where they came from, what they looked like, or what they'd done. When we do that kind of work into Galilee, Christ will meet us there. He has gone before us. So that's part of what's next after Easter. What's next for Mountain Rise? 10 years ago, Mountain Rise celebrated the 50th anniversary of the founding of Mountain Rise. And as part of the celebration, Mountain Riser Judy Till wrote this. In 1985, our Easter offering provided seed money for the start of a soup kitchen at Salem United Church of Christ in downtown Rochester. Volunteers from Mountain Rise and subsequently several other UCC churches supported this ministry, and the Reverend Dr. James Lehman served as pastor there. The Salem Nutrition Center currently serves a complete hot meal on Monday to 150 or more guests, and on Tuesdays, a soup and a sandwich meal, end quote. Well, now, another decade later, some of you are still serving up compassion there at Salem United Church of Christ on Bittner Street, next to the YWCA. He has gone before you into Galilee, into Rochester. That's part of what's next. Others of you are serving up compassion, tutoring immigrant students in the Pines of Parenton. Or you may be listening confidentially as a Stephen minister, helping someone move through a challenging passage in their life. Or praying for people or writing to someone who needs to be reminded that they're connected to a community of caring. That's what's next, folks. Living it right through you and me. And when we do that, however we do that, we meet the risen one right there. In every small kindness, in every gift of compassion. And when we do this, Christ will live in our midst and guide our steps and shelter us beneath wings of grace. That is what's next, Mountain Rise. May it be so. Amen.